So while everyone is awaiting the Nintendo Direct on April 2nd for the Switch 2, Nintendo decided, hey, here's another Direct focused on the Switch 1 on March 27th. And it was a pretty big surprise. It felt like it came out of nowhere. No one was really expecting it anymore at this point. And while I would love to comment on all of it, I feel like that's been done by a lot of people. I really just wanted to talk about one specific announcement from this Direct, which was the virtual game card. I watched a lot of live reactions to the announcement of virtual game cards, and everyone was pretty universally confused. So I kind of wanted to just explain it, try to understand it if you are someone who is confused about it. And also, I have one thing that I wish Nintendo would do with this that it doesn't seem like they are doing it right now. So, the virtual game card is Nintendo's attempt at making digital games behave a little bit more like physical games. And the way that this works is a little bit different from the way digital games are handled right now. But the first thing that needs to be mentioned is that if you paid attention during the Direct, this new feature is optional and you can keep using digital games the same way that they've worked so far. You just have to toggle that option in the system settings of the Switch. And it's also worth mentioning that this works on both the Switch and the Switch 2. And I imagine that's really the reason this is being done right now, is in case you do buy a Switch 2 and you want to keep your original Switch 1, you can share games a little bit differently across both systems. So the primary difference is that now if you have multiple Nintendo Switches, or more than one, the way digital games work is that you can sign in with your Nintendo account on as many systems as you want, and you can download all your games on them. But when you have to set one of your consoles as your primary Switch, and all the other ones will be secondary ones. And what that means is that if you ever try to play one of your digital games on your secondary Switches, they will have to connect to the internet to make sure that that game is not running on your primary Switch or any of the other Switches that have your account. So you always need an internet connection in order to play your digital games on a secondary Switch, even though you can have them installed on as many Switches as you want. The virtual game card is a little different because, for one thing, this system only works on up to 2 Switches, which, that is a limitation, but also I think it's very reasonable to say that one person wouldn't have more than 2 Switches. For the use case that these things are intended, this is still a very fair limitation. Like, even if you're crazy like me and you have 4 Switches, you're probably still only using one very actively, maybe 2 at the most. There's no reason to use 3 Switches actively at the same time. So this new system only works with 2. But the big difference is when you download your games on any system you want, yes. But instead of just launching them and connecting to the internet on your secondary Switch, what happens is that the 2 Switches that you link together are equal. And so you can transfer your games. You don't really transfer your games, you transfer the license, I guess, to play those games between the 2 systems at your leisure, at your preference. So the way that this works is that you might have a Switch where you play most of your games, say, I don't know, Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and you play all of those on one system. And then you have, say, a Switch Lite where you might want to play Kirby games or indie games that are like easier to play on a smaller screen and you want that portability. And so this way you can have your main system with the games you want on that system and your secondary system with the games you want on that system. And you don't need to have them installed on both. And once you have a game transferred and loaded on on either of these systems, you can play it whenever you want without an internet connection. The only time you need an internet connection is if you're removing a virtual game card from one system and loading it onto the other. So this registers, with Nintendo, and you know that the license for that specific game is now on this Switch. But then you can launch it whenever you want, at any time, without an internet connection. So you only need that internet for that specific act of transferring one license from one console to the other. This should make things, I think, a little bit easier for most people, or at least some people, because, there is a good chance that the games you want to play, when you want to play them, you might not have an internet connection. Like if you're someone who wants to play like on a Switch Lite for a trip, you don't want to have to connect to the internet every time because you might be on an airplane or somewhere without internet, and you can't do that connection every single time. So this way you can prepare beforehand. You transfer your license from your main Switch to your Switch Lite, and then you can play those games on your Switch Lite without needing an internet connection again, and it just works the whole time. So it makes things a little bit easier in that sense that you can have your games on either system and you launch them anytime. There's no concept of primary Switch and secondary Switch. It's just this Switch has the license for this game, this Switch has the license for this game, and you can just swap them around whenever you need, but swapping them does require an internet connection. I think, for most people, this should be a better solution than what currently exists. But again, it is optional. So if you prefer the system right now where you connect to the internet every time you want to launch a game, but it works on more consoles than just two, then you can do that as well. One caveat with this that Nintendo only mentioned on the website, though, is that you do need an internet connection when transferring the games from one console to the other, but you also need an internet connection when you launch the games for the first time after loading them. So that is a bit of a pointless addition there. Like, I feel like if you're already connected when you transfer the licenses, there should be really no reason to connect to the internet again when launching the game for the first time. And that just adds like a pointless step in preparation, because if you're transferring multiple games from one console to the other, it sounds like you might have to launch each of those games once just to make sure that they're playable. And then, then future times you launch the game, you can launch them without the internet, but it's just an additional step in preparing. If you're like trying to prepare for a trip or something, that just kind of wastes your time a little bit. That is a little annoying, but it is what it is. I still think this is an improvement overall. Another big change that this brings is sharing games. Right now, the only way you can share your games with someone else is by doing something that probably isn't supposed to be allowed by Nintendo and also could carry some risks, which is just sharing your password and username with someone else, and they can use your account on their system, and then they just play your games with the same conditions of having a primary Switch and secondary Switch. So, if the primary Switch is playing a game, then your friend that also has your account, they can't play that game at the same time. But also, it's kind of, that is a little shaky, because, you're not really supposed to share games like that, I think, in Nintendo's eyes. And it's just risky, you share with a friend, maybe you trust them, but you never really know, right? You're sharing your password with someone else, they might buy games with your account, even, it depends on how you set it up. Of course, you can be a little more careful with it, but it does open up the possibility of something going wrong when you share your account with someone else so they can play your games. The way that it's going to work with virtual game cards, though, is a little bit more convenient. So now the way that you do it is that not only can you move your licenses between two of your own Switches, you can lend one of your virtual game cards to anyone in your family group, so up to 8 people, and you can just transfer the license to play that game temporarily for up to 14 days. So if you want someone in your family to play a specific game, you don't have to share your password and username. You can just lend the game over to them, and they can play them on their account and have their own save file, and they can just play it for up to 14 days. And then if they want to play for longer, you can lend it again. That has to be done locally, so you can't lend the game over the internet. I've heard that some workarounds for that kind of stuff, but you meet up with someone, you share the game with them, and they can play it for 14 days, and then the license is reverted back to the owner of the game. And I think that's a really cool idea. I feel like it makes it easier to share games. It's still not as straightforward as something like Steam Family Sharing, where you can have a bunch of people in a group and their entire library is visible to everyone within that family group at all times. But it's also worth noting that, even if you do have Steam Family Sharing and everyone can see all of the games, if a game is being played by someone at a given time and there's only one license in the entire Steam family, then that only one person can play that game at any given time. So there's still some restrictions there. It's not like it's a perfectly flawless system when you could just share your games at will. And I feel like there is like a bit of a caveat where, like, if you're openly sharing your entire library and you want to play a game, you never know when someone might be playing that game and then your license might be taken away. So this feels a little bit more intentional because when you lend the game to someone, you know, like you're opting actively to relinquish the right to play it for that specific period of time. And then when it reverts back to you, you can play it whenever you want. So there's a little bit more intention behind how games are shared in this way, which, you know, it might be worse in some ways, but I feel like I see where Nintendo is coming from with this approach. Sharing games for up to 14 days, that seems like a bit of a limiting thing, but again, you can share it again after the fact if you meet up with that person again, and they can keep playing for as long as they want. Their save data is always preserved and associated with their account, so if you lend them the game again, they can keep playing from where they left off, or if they choose to buy the game, they can carry that save data forward as well. So, you know, it does make it easier to share games, you know, have someone else try them. And for Nintendo, it might even make it easier to sell some more copies because someone likes a game and you don't want to go through the sharing process each and every time. Then maybe they'll be convinced, oh, I want to buy this, and they'll just buy it and they can carry their save data. You know, there's no sacrifice there, and it just makes it easier to kind of sell more copies as well. So I think overall, this is a really good approach. And again, you can opt out and keep using the system as it currently is. I don't know how Nintendo, or if Nintendo is going to like crack down on password sharing the way that, you know, some companies do. Like maybe they want like that your account is on a bunch of people's systems so they can play your games in a different way. So we'll see how that goes, but overall, I do think that the virtual game card is a good idea. However, there is one thing that I really wish Nintendo would have done with this concept of virtual game cards, which is a physical to digital conversion, or something that I used to call, and I think that I've stolen this term from somewhere else, a digital entitlement program. So the way that this would work is that I envision this as if you buy a game physically, you should be able to convert that license into a digital license so you can play the game without having to insert a physical card each and every time. And now that we have this idea of virtual game cards, I feel like it makes that much more sense to have the virtual game card. You know, you create a virtual version of the game card that you have physically, and that way you can play it without having to insert the card each and every time. Obviously, this opens up some possibilities for, you know, cheating. Like you have a digital copy and a physical copy, and that's basically two games for the price of one. So I do think that would need to be some restrictions on how things work. So the way that I envision this is that you convert your license from the physical card to a digital card or virtual card, and that lasts, say, like that puts the physical card on a timer, say 30 days, 14 days, like lending, whatever it ends up being. And so for that period of time, the physical card will no longer work. And instead, you just have the virtual card that you can transfer between systems, just like any other virtual card. And maybe they could even, if they really want to, disable lending games for physical cards that were converted, if that's necessary. I don't think so. But yeah, this puts the card on a timer, and the physical card on a timer, and then the virtual card lasts just as long. So you can play the game with the digital copy for up to 30 days, and then you have to reinsert the physical card and do the conversion again. Or to make things a little simpler, maybe the game renews, the virtual card is renewed automatically whenever you insert the physical card. So, you know, it really just depends on how long you go without inserting the physical card. I feel like by putting the card on a timer, this makes it, you know, this basically solves all the problems that would arise from this physical to digital conversion. Because one thing that might happen, of course, is if you have two copies, is just obviously you have two copies for the price of one, and that's a problem for Nintendo because they're selling fewer games. But it's also a thing where you might end up scamming someone. Say, if the physical to digital conversion is permanent, then you might convert a physical game to a digital game, and then you sell the physical card that doesn't work anymore, but you don't let the buyer know of that, and you're just kind of scamming them out of their money. That's a bit of a problem. So by having the card locked on a timer, you kind of avoid that. You kind of prevent that kind of scam, because even if you do sell the card and it's locked at the time of sale, eventually it will be unlocked and it'll work again. So it's really only the scammer that would be hurt in that situation. So I think putting the card on the timer really would make this, it would really solve all the problems that would come with this potential system. And I really think it would be awesome because it is a hassle to buy a physical game or multiple physical games. Like I have a big collection here, and it's hard to carry all these games with me at the same time, right? So if I could convert those licenses to digital ones, I could travel much more easily with all my games, play all of them, but I'd still be able to like collect them because I really like the collecting aspect of gaming. I like having all of these games on my shelf. So it would make physical buying a little more enticing, but I think Nintendo probably doesn't want to do that because I feel like they do want to encourage digital game sales, and that's why this system exists in the first place. They want these games they want people to buy games digitally because that way Nintendo makes more money. When you buy a game from a store, there's a cut of that profit that has to go to the store itself. There's costs to distribution and all of that. So when you buy games digitally, all of the money is going to Nintendo and the developers, so they make more money that way, and they prefer that you buy digital games. That's why there's a big push for digital games across the industry. However, I do think this would be really cool for collectors, but I have to admit something that I just thought of is that there is a downside to doing it this way. This physical digital conversion, that would be a problem with that you can't really write data to the game cartridges, I believe. So the cartridges themselves can't be marked as locked or unlocked within the cartridges themselves. And that opens up a problem because then that means that in order to know if a game card is locked or not, you have to connect to the internet to make sure. And that would be a problem because then every game needs an internet connection to launch. So that might be an issue. I don't know how you get around that, really. It's a little complicated. So maybe that's not feasible, but I wish there's some kind of solution for this where you can just make your physical games available digitally. I don't know how you could really make that work, but that would be awesome. But yeah, that's really all I wanted to say about the virtual game cards. I think it's a really good idea. It really improves how digital games can be shared and transferred across devices. It's really setting up, for the Switch 2 launch, because a lot of people might buy the Switch 2 and they already have a Switch 1. But say if you have the Switch 2 as an LCD screen, then some games are gonna look really good on the Switch OLED, for example. So if you want to play a game like Tetris Effect, it probably doesn't benefit that much from the Switch 2, unless it gets a patch or something. But because it's a very colorful experience, it looks really good on the OLED screen. So maybe you'd rather play that on the OLED and then other games you play on the Switch 2. Things like that. And that's really what Nintendo's setting up with this new announcement. And I think it's a good idea. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be available by the end of April on the current Switch, and then I assume at launch on the Switch 2. Whenever that happens, I'm betting on June-ish. But yeah, that's really all I have to say. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Hey, before I go, you may have noticed I didn't do a video last week. I am pulling away from doing weekly videos because it is really tiring. I have a day job, and then these videos usually take up my entire Saturday. It gets really tiring to do this every single week. So I'm switching to an approach where I just do videos whenever it seems appropriate, and then I'll just be live streaming every week. So again, I'm streaming tonight, and I'm also considering streaming daily until the Switch 2 Direct, because I will be live streaming my reaction to that. And I wanted to watch every previous Direct of the Switch era before the Switch 2 Direct, and they're running out of time, so maybe I'll just do daily streams while I'm on vacation right now, just to catch up with all the Directs. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. And yeah, thanks again for watching. Bye.